Okay, I think we'll start, and I'll let people in as they come in. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Owens from the Shelter Island Public Library. Thank you very much for coming tonight. In 2016, Nancy Coltis helped to translocate hundreds of elephants from one park in Malawi to another. And we're very fortunate that she's here tonight to share this amazing adventure with us. And I'm just going to leave it at that. After the talk, there'll be time for a Q&A, and you can use the chat function to ask any questions you want, but we'll leave that till after all the slides. So with that, thank you very much, Nancy, and here we go.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So
you can just start.
Welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us in this very interesting and exciting experience that my family and I had in South Africa, working with these delightful elephants. They're really quite amazing. So we are going to show a series of slides, which I'll annotate so that you can see the extent of the beauty of these animals, plus the habitat where they're presently in. So African Parks is a nonprofit conservation organization that takes on the complete responsibility for the rehabilitation and long-term management of national parks and protected areas in partnership with governments and local communities. African Parks manages 19 national parks and protected areas covering over 14.7 million hectares in 11 countries. African Parks also operates 2 parks in Malawi, which is where we were as a family. One had too many elephants and the other had too few. In July of 2016, African Parks conducted the first stage of a 2-stage operation to move 500 elephants from one park to another. Nothing on this scale had ever been done before. We were invited in the second stage at the end of June of 2017 by my brother, Stephen Coltis, who sits on the board of African Parks and was and has been an avid supporter of their mission for a number of years. This really was once in a lifetime experience for the whole family. And why, let's see.
You can just keep going and
Why moving the elephants at the same order?
no, you can just keep going and we'll just catch up.
Now, what is exactly 500 elephants? 500 elephants was one of the most significant translocation initiatives in the conservation history. African Parks, in collaboration with the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, moved more than 500 elephants in addition to around 1,500 other animals of various species to Nikutakata Wildlife Reserve. This one-way journey took place between 2016 and 2017 and saw these extraordinary giants travel more than 350 kilometers from Luande National Park and Majete Wildlife Reserve in Nikutakata Wildlife Reserve in northern Malawi. All 3 parks are managed by African Parks in partnership with DNPW. The total distance that was covered throughout the maneuvers roughly equated to 125,000 kilometers, which is equivalent to 3 times around the world, using 4 30-ton rigged trucks from South Africa for capture and delivery to their new homes. Staff, trucks, and equipment will have journeyed for 5 days to be on site in Luande by early June and then Majete in July of 2017. Hundreds of kilometers of roads and river crossings have been repaired and constructed within Luande. Majete and Nikutakata to improve both vehicle and animal accessibility. Road networks have been enhanced to facilitate the construction of the fencing in Nikutakata including that of 47,000 acre sanctuary and the 45,000 acres of the wider park. This additional infrastructure was an invaluable asset to the park's tourism capacity and the prevention of human-wildlife conflict. It has also an important source of employment for local communities. Let me see. Read from the screen. So I start at the top. Luande National Park is 548 kilometers squared of floodplains, lagoons, woodlands that together support over 400 species of birds and the largest population of remaining elephants in the country, comprising approximately 800 individuals. Majete Wildlife Reserve in Malawi's Lower Shire Valley measures 700 kilometers of rampant poaching. African Parks assumed management in 2003 and has restored its biological integrity, making it Malawi's only Big Five reserve. Elephants were introduced in 2006, along with a host of other species, including rhino, lion, and leopard. They also had a single ostrich that needed a mate. Today, approximately 400 elephants exist in the park. Nikakahata Wildlife Reserve is 1,800 kilometers squared, and it stretches from the Great Rift Valley to just shy of Lake Malawi. African Parks, having assumed management in 2015, is committed to restoring the reserve's biodiversity through the reintroduction of key species translocated from source populations in the other reserves. 20 years ago, prior to depletion through poaching, elephants flourished in Nikotokaka, numbering over 1,500 animals.
Here's the map.
This is a map of Malawi showing the two national parks with the focus on Luande. Years ago, there were 1,500 elephants in Nikahaka Wildlife Reserve, and poachers slaughtered all but 70 animals. This is a photograph showing a pile of leg traps that were collected by the African parks used by the poachers. These were metal snares. The poachers placed the hooped pieces of wire across animal tracks where they catch the neck of an antelope or the foot of an elephant, tightening as they pull away and gouging the animal's flesh. In these 2 years in charge here, wildlife rangers have recovered 23,000 snares from the park. And this is an example of what that means visually. Across the continent, conservation groups were trying different ways to save the species. Some advocate for wildlife corridors, allowing elephants to move from place to place. Others try to promote human-elephant coexistence, building fences of beehives for farmers to frighten crop-raiding herds away. In Tanzania, one group is even throwing condoms filled with chili powder, which elephants hate, to ward off the animals. Oh, the fence is it's not. Oh, African Parks works by creating islands of safety circled by a 7,000-volt electric fence. The fence is monitored every day, and each section is covered by a team leader. As you can see in the opening statement, elephant populations are plummeting across this continent. A recent continent-wide survey showed catastrophic losses, with numbers dipping from 1.3 million in 1979 to around 350,000, far lower than expected. Elephant populations in Africa are under pressure from poaching and habitat loss, says Andrew Parker, African Parks Director of Operations. They are now increasingly being confined into these smaller and smaller protected areas. Pragmatism is essential for effective conservation, says Parker. The idealistic view of Africa as this vast open landscape where animals can move freely from point A to point B does not exist anymore. So how do you move the elephants? The first half of this extraordinary journey spanned the same 6-week period in 2016 when we moved 261 elephants from Luande and 1,117 animals of other species, including sable, kudu, antelope, buffalo, to name just a few. Okay, this is the next one. The elephant translocation occurred in phases, each of which has been carefully planned to ensure minimal stress to the animals. Elephants were darted by helicopter and retrieved from the field by crane and recovery trucks. The last picture, this is the vet who took care of the animals once they were darted. And he was the one who was in the lead helicopter driving the animals into the area and making sure that they were all healthy and not injured. So when everybody, we were all in helicopters to drag the elephants into a containment area where they could be handled, processed, and examined. And this is an example of, this is a female and her baby, and she was darted and the baby stays with the mother. This is, you can see there are 2 elephants that have already been darted on the left-hand side, and the one standing is about to go over. This elephant was darted by the vet, and within a few minutes, it goes through their system, and then they can be put on their side and handled. This is a photograph of what we did with each of the elephants as a group. Here we were clearing and monitoring the trunk to make sure that the breathing airways were open. The elephants were pushed on their side to keep them from putting too much weight on their lungs. And in this photograph, the elephant was being turned over on its side so we could breathe properly. This is an example of how the elephants were handled after they were darted. The people that are working there, including my brother-in-law who's in the front, to covering the elephant's eyes to protect them from sunlight. And this is an example, again, of another elephant that had been darted, and we're working as teams to monitor their breathing and making sure that they were putting their ears over their eyes to protect them from the sun, and just making sure that they were okay. This looks probably somewhat horrendous, but this was the best way and the safest way to transport them to the trucks. Lifting them by crane into their wake-up boxes where the antidote is administered by the vet, and to keeping them calm in the truck. Their entire journey and ensuring delivery and release at the other side. View of the lowering of one of the females into the truck. Their legs are wrapped with linen, and then they're suspended on the crane. This was one of the larger elephants, and this one's being transported by truck on its own. And then this is a flatbed where there are 2 or 3 elephants can be placed on the bed, on the truck bed. And then this is the way that they are processed to be raised by the crane. And this is in a wake-up box. They're put in anesthetized and then they're darted after they've been processed. And this is the elephant that's coming out of the anecdote and is trying to get onto her feet.
Immediately after they were placed. Too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is a rear view of the the chambers of the elephants when they're standing. And they were very calm. It was really extraordinary. We all thought they probably understood we were there to help. Which one? Prior to African Parks assuming management of Nikotahokta in 2015, the park had suffered a significant reduction in its elephant populations and other wildlife due to years of poaching, which depleted elephant numbers from 1,500 to fewer than 100. African Parks, in partnership with DNPW, spent the last 2 years overhauling the law enforcement in Nikotahokta and halting poaching, working with communities and preparing the communities that surrounded the park and preparing the reserve for the elephant's safe arrival. The translocation had 2 objectives: to restock Nikotahokta and to relieve pressure from the elephant surplus in Luande and Majete. Given Malawi is a densely populated agro-based country, ecological corridors no longer exist to allow for natural movements of wildlife. Therefore, this human assisted migration was needed to provide the best chance for a long-term and sustainable future for these elephants. And this goes on. Luande National Park and Majete Wildlife Preserve, located in southern Malawi, are considered to be source populations for elephants. In consideration of the size of the parks and the availability of natural resources, both parks are near to capacity with approximately 800 elephants in Luande and 400 elephants in Majete prior to the start of the 500 elephant initiative. The density of these populations is resulting in the degradation of wildlife habitats and high levels of human-wildlife conflict, largely deriving from crop raiding elephants and the degradation of habitats. Do we have, okay, 10. 20 years ago, prior to the current depletion of game, approximately 1,500 elephants populated Nikotahokta. Prior to the translocation, fewer than 100 remained. Since African Parks assumed management in 2015, they completely overhauled law enforcement and anti-poaching methods, as well as invested heavily in improvements to park infrastructure, making the reserve now safe for the elephants and other species to be reintroduced. Okay. Additionally, the return of the elephants to the park marked its establishment as an important ecotourism attraction through which tourism revenue flowed and employment opportunities opened to the direct benefit of local communities. By restoring biological value to these parks and managing them correctly with our government and tourism partners, both their economic and intrinsic value was made more tangible for local residents to whom the parks belong as part of their natural heritage. Keep going. Through these restorations, Malawi gained 3 globally iconic protected areas for wildlife tourism. The following videos that you'll see will also feature Harry, Prince Harry, who has been extraordinarily helpful and is a partner in the parks.
President.
He's president of this national park. So
We apologize.
Oops,
Technical difficulties.
we had he will be coming onto the screen shortly.
Elephants, that's one of the cores of Africa. You can't imagine anywhere like this existing without elephants. People can connect with them. One of the fears, sort of overcrowding of elephants and wondering where are we going to put all these animals? You know, in some countries the numbers are, dropping unbelievably quickly. In other countries you've got almost too many. So there's this weird imbalance. So organisations like this need to constantly come up with new methods to move these animals, to care for them, to make sure that these places are looked after. And this is a challenge, it's a huge task. It's amazing to see such unbelievable creatures being moved in a way that you could never even dream of. Everyone's part of this, whether it's moving a leg and putting the strap on, whether it's helping. Every single person feels part of this. To be with elephants is such a massive beast. It's a unique experience. In a weird way, they know we're here to help. Otherwise, the wake-up box would be a completely different story. And they're so calm, they're so relaxed. They need to be moved to another place. So this is the most efficient and least invasive way of being able to do it. I can tell you after 3 weeks, there's zero stress on these animals, and they're going from one beautiful place to another beautiful place.
Under mounting pressure from poaching, habitat loss, and human-wildlife conflict, the African elephant is being rapidly exterminated in many parts of the continent. Numbering more than 10 million a century ago, recent census results indicate they have been reduced to fewer than 450,000. With as many as 40,000 elephants being poached every year to feed the insatiable demand for ivory, the rate of poaching now outstrips their birth rate, threatening their long-term future. Few positive tales emanate from elephant conservation in Africa. 500 elephants is a story of hope, possibility, and of survival. And that is the end of our presentation. Do we have questions, or if anyone would like to ask any questions, I can try to answer them. Oops, I think
Muted. You can use the chat function, or maybe just ask your question.
Yes, I would. My mom and I were wondering how the elephants, first of all, that was incredible. It's so amazing to see the elephants, and the size of them is incredible. And my mom actually was asking me, she was wondering how the elephants give birth.
They need assistance.
Do they do it with assistant? I mean, no, because they're giving birth in nature all the time, but how does that usually happen? Do you know, Nancy?
We never discussed, the birth of the elephants. They tend to go in female groups. And it appears, but I'm not really knowledgeable about the birthing process for the elephants. But they seem to manage it pretty well on their own.
Right.
And the females, they work in big groups. They help each other. So if an elephant has 2 babies, for example, some of the other females will come in and help them, nursing or whatever is needed. They're very, very closely knit.
Right.
Amazing.
Nancy, Deborah has a question. How long did you stay on the preserve? Was the operation a week long?
No, we were there for 2 weeks. And we lived in they were basically tents on the river. And we had to be very careful because it had a netting for the room where you slept was really just covered in netting. And it had a door on one side, but the monkeys could get in. So you had to be sure that you locked them very tightly. And then sometimes the male elephants, they were very adventuresome, and they would try to, they could smell that there was food or something if there were cabins. And we had, they were really basically a tent with a bricked in area where they had a kitchen and bathroom shower. So that, and if there was a lot of activity of animals, particularly hippos, which can be very, very aggressive, particularly with their young. And we were on an island surrounded by waters filled with hippos. So we had to be very careful about the hippos and about the monkeys. We had to make sure that the doors were shut well, that we didn't leave food in the tents because they would have gotten in. They knew how to open the doors. They were very dexterous. So it was really fascinating with all of the contact we had with wildlife on the water with the hippos. There were crocodiles also, and then just working with the animals, with the elephants was extraordinary. And just seeing the translocation to areas that will give them larger habitats was really very exciting. Do we have
Any more questions? I have a question. It's kind of a tough one, but what was your favorite moment of the whole, can you, it's hard to, I'm sure it's hard to answer, but what was your favorite moment of the whole experience? Was there anything that, gave you goosebumps?
Well, I think what gave us all goosebumps was that we had the ability to literally work with these animals, touch them. When they were darted, they were completely asleep. And so you had to monitor their breathing. We had to pull the ears over their eyes so that their eyes weren't damaged by sunlight. And we monitored each group. It was a small group, would monitor individual elephants to make sure that they were breathing properly and that they were coming out of the anesthesia that they were darted with. So it was really extraordinary because we were very hands-on.
Oh, that's exciting. And Angela wants to know, how did the elephants adapt to their new location?
They appear to, from what I've heard from African parks, they've appeared to have gone to their new habitat, and it's working very well. They have all that's necessary. They have the trees that they feed on. They have the wild grasses. They have water supplies, and they're very near because it's on waterways. They can go down and drink and bathe, and it's they seem to be doing very well.
How does the organization encourage visitors to raise income for the park? Deborah wants to know.
Well, people who have been exposed to what National African Parks has been doing, there is an organization where you can donate if people are interested in donating to African Parks efforts to maintain the health of these wonderful creatures. And the park itself is really quite extraordinary. Also, there's been a higher rate of employment in the area where there's been a lot of unemployment because the park now has become much more concentrated and much more, has a larger ability to bring in tourism and people who are interested in conservation, who can have these experiences being near elephants or working with the elephants, or the many myriad species that are in these parks. There's a park with sadly only one male ostrich. You could always see him running on the horizon. And we all hoped that he could find a mate because he was always running in silhouette against the early morning sky. It's just the work that African Parks does is really quite extraordinary. I'm getting a, a note, which is a very good one. There is to talk about the poaching and the shoot to kill, the process of what one does with poachers, because poaching was an enormous issue, particularly for elephants because of the ivory. And there was an enormous amount of poaching in the past decades. And African Parks has taken an enormous stand in trying to build parks that are safe for this wildlife. And they've done a very incredible job in 2 reserves where the populations have exploded after having been poached almost to extinction. And they're also good with introducing other animals. They introduced a, was it not a cougar? Was it? It was leopards. It was a leopard that they brought in. So they're trying to bring back wildlife that's indigenous to the areas, particularly of these parks, and also trying to maintain, which they've done, I think, through the high fences that they put around the park. The entire park now has been fenced in with 30-foot high electrified fences. So if poachers try to climb the fence, it will not be a happy time for them. But it's the only way that they can keep the elephants within a protected area and keeping poachers out. So the poaching issue was an enormous struggle for African Parks for a very long time. And they now seem to have an infrastructure, particularly with cameras, that allows them to see who is in the park and who's there legally and who's there to poach. And poachers hopefully understand that if they go into the park and shoot animals, the people that are on the militia that are there to protect the entire parkland are allowed to shoot to kill. So it's pretty brutal, but it's brutal what the poachers do because they frequently don't kill the animal. They shoot them, particularly elephants, and they carve out their tusks while they're still living. So it's a horrible thing to talk about, but it's really necessary that these animals are protected. And this whole infrastructure with African Parks has really ratcheted up the ability to keep these animals safe. And also include that there is a larger population now of elephants because they're being protected. Are there any other questions that people might have, or? Oh, can they?
It's so fascinating, and it's thank you so much for sharing this, Nancy. It's overwhelming to see the photography and see what you experienced. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Well, it was our pleasure, and it's really extraordinary to have had the ability and just to work with these animals. It was amazing. They're unique and very family oriented. It was very moving.
It's very, I was saying to you before we started recording, it's just, life has been pretty stressful for everybody for a while, and this is a very uplifting story. So I really appreciate that. And it looked like Christine wanted to say something.
Hi, Chrissy.
Hi. Yeah, I would just love to hear more because I've actually heard you talk about it, Nancy, to share how the communities around the elephant areas are also being protected. That the relocation of elephants is also protecting the communities surrounding them so that people, that their gardens and their trees aren't being overtaken by the elephants. Can you talk a little bit about that, Nan?
Sure. No, it's actually an excellent question because a lot of the areas around the park area, they're really series of islands. So the island across the isthmus from where the park is it's populated with many people, and they grow their own gardens. And initially, before African parks became involved in protection of this whole parkland, there were absolutely no fences at all. So the elephants were free to wander wherever they wanted to wander. And they could smell the gardens from across this small body of water. Now, the body of water was inhabited by, and still is, by hippos and by crocodiles. But an elephant doesn't really care much about, they're not afraid of the crocodiles or the others that are in between. So they would swim over to the island across from where the reserve is, and they would trample through the gardens, and obviously didn't win a lot of accolades. So African Parks has been very successful in doing outreach with communities that surround the park. And they also, because of the ability of elephants and other animals to swim, and the proximity of other islands where people live, that's why they put up and installed this 30-foot high electrified fence. So it keeps the elephants in and the animals safe, and it keeps poachers pretty much out. Sometimes they can break through, but it's their system now for dealing with poachers is pretty, it's not the nicest, but people who, particularly if they, if they shoot an elephant and then carve off their tusks while they're still living, which has happened quite a bit, they're just heartless. And the position now with African Parks, because they have the infrastructure and the people that are interested in conservation, they now are able to monitor with a very sophisticated computer system about people who are on the property that aren't supposed to be there. And they can tell the difference between poachers and their rangers. And at this point, given the amount of poaching that's happened, the people who are armed and who walk through the areas to make sure that the poachers are not there, they shoot to kill if they find them. It's pretty straightforward, but it does protect the animals, and it keeps, hopefully, future people who are interested in trying to break in and take ivory or kill an elephant and carve off the tusks. That's really pretty much been stopped, which is tremendous. And it keeps also a better relationship with people in the surrounding areas.
Here's another question.
Is there another question? No. Oh,
Can you say it?
no.
Oh, I can read it to you. Anthony says, Prince Harry spoke about everyone pushing in even to move a leg. He'd imagine even a leg is unimaginably heavy. How many men did it take to move the elephants even slightly?
A lot. Well, but you may have seen how they were lifted on cranes. Nobody could ever, no human could ever move an elephant. So the way that they were moved, either from, if they had been darted and they were far away from where we were processing, the elephants that were darted and that were trucked into the encampment that we had, they now have, the fencing is much better. They have electrified fence to keep the poachers out and the animals in. And they have a very sophisticated, African Parks has a very, very sophisticated computer system that can, it has an infrared availability. They can tell the difference between a human and an animal. So it's in infinitely better shape than it was a number of years ago. Poaching has really come down quite a bit, and they still have the process is that if they see poachers, they shoot to kill. And
Nancy, I know that elephants are extremely emotional creatures. I
indeed,
had read about that. Did you have any experiences while you were there that where you were able to see that they have this kind of intelligence? That, you were saying they're super family oriented. And I was just curious if maybe there were, situations that you experienced there where you were able to see that.
Yes, unfortunately. We had a female who was darted, and she fell over in a different direction than they anticipated, and she fell on top of her baby and killed it. So it was for everybody, because everybody who was there at the reserve was there to help protect these incredible creatures. And to have a baby killed because of the way the mother was darted was just heartbreaking for everybody. There wasn't a dry eye in the whole group. And unfortunately, that was the only issue that we had. All the other elephants were safely transported to their new homes. But that was a very sad event for everybody. Are there any other questions that people might have?
I would just like to say thanks, Nancy. That was so
Hi, Anthony.
informative. You can't see me. I'm on a friend's computer because I'm traveling and they have their camera blocked. So I'm unfortunately a ghost, but thank you so much. It was really a great watch, and I learned so much. Like, I want to go there now immediately.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thanks. That means a great deal.
Oh, well, thank you again. I'm so happy to be watching this instead of the normal goofy Netflix fare. I wish you were on every night.
Well, once you work with these, the elephants are extraordinary, and they're very family oriented. And once you work with them, you fall in love. They're extraordinary.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well,
It was an honor working with them, actually.
yeah, I really appreciate you sharing. It was amazing.
Oh,
I
thanks.
think, Angela, did you want to say something?
Yes, please. Well, I've been to Malawi, and I've also been on quite a few safaris when I lived in Mozambique and Uganda. And I think that this was an excellent presentation, and I really commend all of you for this work. And, it is a great struggle to save the elephants, and also to keep the relationship with the communities, when they raid the fields and all that. I mean, it's more than just dealing with the park, it's dealing with the surrounding areas. And I also think that the social setup of the different herds is absolutely critical, because you have the matriarch and the whole herd around her, and how they communicate, because the elephants do really communicate in an incredible way, very long distances. So I'm sure that they must be studying how they're interacting and how they're doing. So I thank you very much. And, I hope people, when the COVID is over, will have a chance to go on a safari. Thank you from Angela.
Thank you
Aw.
very much. Oh, what happened? It's okay, Poppy.
Oh, I have one more question, Nancy.
Yes.
I noticed some elephants looked brown and some of them looked gray. Was the brown just dirt, or are there different subtle differences in terms of their, the breeds? Are there different breeds?
No, they're all pretty much the same breed, but some of them like to shower themselves with mud because it keeps the it keeps the insects away.
Ah, okay.
And it also is probably it gives them some it may help them because of the heat, because it's wet. And
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
you're welcome. Are there any other questions or comments? Or
Oh, yeah, there is a question. What was the mother elephant's reaction to the baby's death?
she cried, she mourned, and it's a very profound thing to see and hear.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think there was a dry eye on anyone who was working with the elephants that day. There wasn't a dry eye, but we felt so awful I mean, there was nothing we could have done, but she was in mourning, and everybody was in mourning with her. It was extraordinary. They're amazing creatures. Very family oriented and very protective of their young. Do we have any, are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your attending and your wonderful questions. And hopefully this was interesting for you. And we thank you very, very much.
Nancy, thank you so much. It was really, it's a wonderful adventure. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for attending. It was
Thank
really
you.
fun.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you for your attendance.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.